Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel. I'm joined right above me by Justin from Playing Board Games. And today we're going to talk about something kind of fun, I think, which is about scenario complexity. And, well, what is scenario complexity? It is broadly how much more does the scenario ask players to keep track of and manipulate than kind of your bog standard basic Arkham. And I actually thought about this a few days ago, and then there was a Reddit thread, I think a day or so ago, that was about this from new players wondering and caring about like how much more complex does this game get. And to be honest, it's an interesting question, and I wanted to have you join me to discuss like what makes a scenario complex and what makes them simple and what are the positives and negatives about adding complexity to your scenario. And I think maybe there's even a little side discussion we can have here about what the custom content community does here. If you notice that they
Mm.
are more on the complexity is cool and fun, or is there a lot to mine out of a more simple scenario also? So some just our own experiences and our own thoughts about this. We both recently had a discussion on what we thought about every scenario in the game.
Mhm.
So this isn't also a place for us to we have differences of opinion. So we're going to talk about things in positive, negative lights that might be different. But it is a vehicle, and maybe that's a choice word there for discussion as usual. So yeah, I've talked for a few minutes already. I put something here on the screen if you want to kind of react to. What do you think
Mhm.
about complexity in this game? Where does it? I mean, we're going to talk about where it comes from too, but like, does this seem about right? Like, what makes a scenario complex?
Yeah, so I'll have to just I'm gonna preface all this by just giving a little bit of a little caveat where I actually because I'm a little fricked up where I actually my level of complexity is a little bit like I think the threshold is higher than what I would say the average gamer. I actually only think there's probably only like four scenarios in Arkham I would personally consider to be complex scenarios, at least in the official thing.
Mm,
But was fun was kind of going down to the definition that you gave it, which was how much more does it add than the three starting scenarios? Because I think that's kind of like the baseline that we have for what a standard expectation of complexity should be, right? The
hmm
Gathering or Smoke and Mirror. No, it's not Smoke and Mirrors. What's the new one called?
Oh no, it is
New Gathering.
New Gathering. It's Spreading Flames. Spreading Flames.
Spreading Flames. That's kind of like the example of what Arkham is at its most simple level. However, Spreading Flames is actually more complex than the Gathering. So
Sure
even that
is.
kind of idea of what is the base level of an Arkham scenario has risen a bit in the new core. Um, there is Smoke and Mirrors, which I think is the most complex scenario of the three. Same with Midnight Masks.
hmm
And then there's Devourer Below and Queen of Ash,
hmm
which is kind of just like in between the two. It's not as complex as the middle scenario, but is offering more kind of like the difficulty side of thing, which is a whole different discussion that we're not talking about within this video here.
hmm
Um, but I think that's a great baseline for how to look at what complexity is. And another thing, one thing I always like to add when I'm talking to players when they're playing any board game in general, if I view the game as complex or difficult, is the number of actions, the number of
hmm
possible things you can do on your turn, which in Arkham is incredibly high. Like it's
Ooh.
actually like the number it changes depending on so many things. But I think that to go that beyond that, what complexity is in Arkham is how many more additional things does it add on to the multitude of things you can already do during your turn, right? Like, for example, is there a minecart that you need to position in certain places? Is there wind blowing locations across the board, right? Are there multiple different things you need to keep track of? And that to me is when complexity starts to become more notable in Arkham Horror, the card game.
It's a spectrum, right? There's, as you said, there are some that you might just categorize as being complex, but as we'll see, we're going to pick a couple of scenarios, actually more than a couple, to talk about in a little bit more detail at the end of this little preamble here. But there's a spectrum. Some things are pretty simple, but then have one little twist. Some things are quite complex, but ultimately they're actually kind of simple in some ways. We'll get into that. So yeah, I agree that baseline Arkham actually is probably for a lot of new players quite complex. Just the
Yes.
number of things you can do on your turn. It's a really good way to talk about it. So like if that's a baseline that there's how many basic actions? Like seven or eight, right?
Yeah. There's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah. Adding anything to that, I'm not gonna say, like, it's a bad thing because there are so many campaigns and scenarios, but I think designers have to be aware of what is it that the players are bringing to the table, as it were. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a big thing that the the number of actions that you can take, like Arkham is a very complex game in its baseline, but it's the ability to add more complexity onto the existing complexity is what makes Arkham have the longevity that it does. So when we say complex scenarios, we're not talking about scenarios that are bad in per se. We're actually really kind of like, I think the complexity of Arkham is something to be celebrated when it's done well, and sometimes I'd say it's not done in a good way, but sometimes it's done in a great way. And when it is, those are like the really memorable Arkham moments.
That's right. We're gonna get into some examples that really speak to the highs and lows of all of this. So, yeah, this isn't complexity sounds like a scary word sometimes,
Hmm.
and we're not trying to as you'll see, we're not gonna be talking about it as a 100% bad thing,
Yep.
or good thing. It's just it is what it is, but I agree with you with the number of scenarios we have, complexity is kind of inevitable and
Yes.
probably necessary.
Yep.
Okay. So, what are some things that scenarios can do? So, one thing is long setups. I can measure based on looking in the campaign guide how much stuff you have to do just to get the board ready to go. It's maybe a
Yep.
minor thing in the grand scheme of things, like you said. What are you doing on your turn? But if you're the person who's setting up the board and you have to read the campaign guide like 5 times just to figure out what you're doing, it's probably a complex scenario. Man, sometimes the way they write these campaign guides, I feel like I'm illiterate. You're like, what are they saying? And
Yes. Yep.
it can be a lot. I think a lot of the Scarlet Keys scenarios, partly because there are so many different uh, things that can change how things are set up, different versions or different campaign choices that
Hmm.
cause something to be a little bit different. That they're hard to read, and I think that makes for kind of a complex scenario on the front end, even if necessarily maybe that doesn't mean during the scenario it says bad, but I do find that this is one thing that can cause you to be, like the one thing I think about complexity is if it's causing a lot of mental or cognitive load on the players, that can be, it's that there's a threshold that you don't want to cross, I think, as a designer. And
100%.
yeah, when the setup is already like turning you off from, like, I've heard of people who, um, the previous night before their game, the group gets together, they're already setting up the table because they're like, I can't spend 30 minutes on top of our 2 3 hour session just reading the intro. So
Yeah, it's one of those things where a lot of game design is actually kind of just like tricking your players. And I think that long setups do exactly that. They trick the players into thinking the scenario is more complex than it actually is. Because long setups doesn't necessarily mean the scenario itself is complicated. But I do think that long setups or confusing setups, like in the case of Black Star's Rise,
mm,
it can really add to the complexity in a way that you as a player potentially can feel it without actually being put into a complex situation.
exactly. And if it's just the one person who's setting up the game because you own the
Yes.
campaign, that one person probably feels it much more than everyone else. I don't know much more to
Yeah.
say that. I just wanted to throw that in because I do feel like
It,
there are some scenarios where it's just shuffle the encounter cards, put 2 locations into play, let's go. And then there are setups where, thank goodness for TTS, where you just press the button and the same thing happens. But there's a lot going on.
yeah.
Okay. The map size. I think about standard is 8 or 9 scenario or locations in the scenario, sometimes a little bit more. But once it starts getting beyond 10-ish, that can cause a lot of complexity for the board state. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more in a few, but I think of something like Edge of the Earth, where sometimes you get 15, 16
Yes.
locations out there. And just paying attention to everything and maybe where enemies are, where they're coming from, where they can go to, the connections between locations. If you
Yep.
don't have fancy little connectors, this becomes a bit harder to manage.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that I think both Edge of the Earth Innsmouth and Hemlock do very well with large locations, like large maps, because those are all scenarios with like can get big maps, or alternatively, they embrace the idea of like anti-complexity with their map sizes by
Mhm.
making the adjacency rule just kind of be standard.
That's right, yeah.
That's such a good way to reduce the complexity in this kind of area, but it's 100% true. Like, I think of the Heart of Madness Part 1 and Part 2, the giant spoke wheel, which
Yeah.
at this point now I understand that map very well, but like on my first playthroughs, it was overwhelming to be like, how does all of this work? When you're playing in real life, you don't have the fancy little translucent gray lines to show you where to go, right? You do in Tabletop Simulator. So this is a huge part of complexity. Um, and especially like I think if you want big maps, you need to simplify connections. And I think that Edge of the Earth for the most part didn't really succeed in that, except for like in City of the Elder things, which is I think a notable thing for why Edge of the Earth can sometimes feel like a long journey. Again,
Mm.
it's like that idea of tricking the players,
Mhm.
which is kind of where the complexity stuff comes in as well.
Yeah. This is a good point about just the blind play also, right? That every scenario is gonna be tougher, tricking yourself that it is tougher on the first play.
Hmm.
But another measure here is like how many plays does it take for you to like internalize all of this stuff and it feels like it's not all that complex. And we play a lot of Arkham and still there's some where I have to slow down and be like, okay, what's going on here, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So for those of you, and that's probably most of you, who don't play an absurd amount of Arkham, it's like maybe returning to a campaign you played 2 or 3 years ago. It's like another blind play. So,
Yep.
okay. Next is just kind of a blanket additional rules on like an act, an agenda, or story cards that are just always in play. And these could be anything, right? Sometimes it's as simple as monsters get +1 fight and +1 of 8. Something like that happens every now and then. Sometimes there's forced effects that are just like part of the scenario. So I'm not saying like you shouldn't do this because clearly you kind of need to put text on acts, agendas, other story
Hmm.
cards. But to the extent that you forget about these things, there's a level where it's like maybe this becomes a much more complex scenario when that's not always in play. That effect only happens on agenda 2, but not on agenda 1 or 3. That make things a bit more difficult to manage.
Yeah, every additional card with text on it that's like beyond. So I feel like Arkham has kind of become this idea of what are we allowed to have cards on like text on standard baseline,
Hmm.
and it's like act and agenda, right? Like that's kind of the line that you're looking for. And you'll actually notice that if you've been playing from the beginning or if you're playing through everything, the philosophy of where additional text like this actually changed. Like if you look at Dunwich Legacy, the locations, their design was a lot more restrictive and there were a lot more memory issues associated with them. And that actually kind of vanished for locations. You'll notice that now more modernly it's like as an additional cost to investigate or when you discover clues or
Hmm.
like they have an effect that you can use as a player kind of became the thing to kind of reduce the complexity there because it's true when there's act and agenda and like one story card is kind of like to me like the line of that I'm saying like okay this is manageable for players but as soon as you add additional story cards or god forbid additional acts and agendas right or all that kind of stuff that like um it adds the complexity. Not to mention, this is I'm going to kind of get ahead of onto the custom content creator stuff, but the opening flop, like what the initial setup of the scenario is really important for defining how your players feel about complexity. And when you're setting up an official or a custom Arkham scenario, pay attention to what the board looks like when you just get started,
Hmm.
because that's a good way to also to have a metric for the complexity. Does it give it all at you all at once, or is it going to kind of like slowly add complexity as you understand the mechanics of the scenario, which in turn is actually reducing the complexity of the scenario overall?
See, this is why I like having you on. All of those things I would not have thought of on my own, but you're right. All of that stuff is like really important to ease your players into these memory issues. I was just gonna say, like, if people are more used to like a digital game where the effects are just like always like the game is keeping track of the rules for you, right?
Mhm.
Like a +1 fight or +1 health or something on a monster. a digital game would like cause the number on the card to be different, right? You would look at it and say, "Oh, it's actually a 2 rather than a 1." And in a physical game, you can't do that. So all like the modifiers need to be everywhere else. So your point about the locations being limited to investigation or discovering clues, it's like, when am I looking at that card already? I'm looking at the card when I'm doing an investigation. I want to know what the shroud is. And now I can also see on that card it has that other effect. But I'm not going to be looking at the act or agenda if it says when you discover a clue, you know, take two horror or something silly. So
Yeah.
it's tough to design like with the limited space around that idea, but I think you're right that they figured that out compared to early Arkham. Hmm,
Yeah, they found a better way to like give that information to the players where things are like a lot of the stuff rather than just saying like enemies get +1 fight, they have cards that like attach to enemies. So you're like,
right.
what oh this enemy has like an enhancement, like it's getting stronger from an actual card.
Hmm. And then sometimes like there's no way around that. I remember being this is in Hemlock House. By the way, there's going to be some spoilers here and there. We're not going to do anything horrible during this part of the video, but when we talk about the scenarios in depth, there will be. But I remember being so disappointed playing Hemlock House and wanting to, because this is a scenario in Hemlock Vale, obviously, that has just location adjacency. That's very simple, right? Connected locations are adjacent, and I wanted to play what's the one where you get clues from connecting locations?
Seeking answers.
No, the double
Oh, the yeah, it's testing sprint.
testing sprint. I was like, great, there's clues everywhere, and I played it, and then like a round or two later, I looked at the act or agenda, and it says you can't discover clues from locations without investigators, and I was like, oh, I would not have remembered that. I saw it, I know
Yeah,
initially, but it wasn't something that came up. And this is where I'm going to throw the next bullet point up here is anything that's unusual, meaning that your usual Arkham loop gets disrupted. And I know that's a really minor one, and I understand why they have that there for that particular scenario, but that's never a rule in the game, right? That is not
yeah,
something you need to think about generally. So whenever the scenario adds in something that is unusual, like against the usual rules, or something that's unique to that scenario, or even other timing points. So Hemlock House again is a bit like Waking Nightmare, where you have that infestation bag to pull from the
hmm
predation bag. I think in Hemlock House, it's causing you to do something when you don't normally do something, and remembering that, especially if you play a lot of Arkham, to break your muscle memory
yeah.
can be tough.
Yeah, this is one of those things where I actually think this complexity point actually hits the players who play more Arkham than the player who plays less Arkham, which is kind of the
Probably
funny
right.
point in complexity,
Yeah.
right? Because I feel like new players that I play with, or like players who play like with me on Patreon Game Day, who might not play as much as Arkham I do, are really good at pointing out when I miss these rules, right? Because they're like, this is the restrictive thing that is kind of just there because it's not like muscle memory. Like an example is in Echoes of the Past,
Mm,
placing Doom on the agenda. I always do it, and then I'm like, no, that's not this scenario, right? And I think that these are like in that the thing with like the Hemlock House, like I think that that's the kind of the frustration point that sometimes complexity can add, where it's like I messed up this rule that is only here in this scenario and is only written on this one card that I read and internalized, but it slipped my mind. And I think that's kind of like where the complexity kind of becomes a little bit more fiddly. Like
mhm,
you said, like it makes sense in Hemlock House why that line of text is there because the scenario would be probably too easy if it wasn't or too exploitable, right?
right.
But it's like one of those things where it's interesting as the designers to kind of look at that and be like, is it necessary to have that line of text? Like, is it ultimately a bad thing if players want to do this? And sometimes you just got to make like sacrifices or choose to keep it. And this is again for custom designers as well, that maybe don't worry about the edge cases
Yeah.
because you might just be adding complexity when you don't need it, unless you feel like you absolutely need it or it breaks the scenario. But most of the time, I mean, it's called cut your darlings for a reason, right? Like kill your darlings, right? Like just like don't like get rid of stuff that you love because you might not need it.
Yeah, sometimes you can solve these problems in a different way. This is just it causes memory issues, which are yeah. I agree with you though that it's probably hits us worse than anyone else. And part of that is because we play too fast. But, if
Yep.
you're stopping to look at every card every round, you probably don't forget about some of these things. So I'm sure there's a commenter who says, I never forget everything. I'm very meticulous about all of it. I'm like, okay, good for you. But generally, if it hits one person, it's going to hit more than one person. So,
Yep.
and this bullet point isn't just for things like Echoes of the Past. It's also for, um, like Black Stars Rise, also where the setup is weird, but also the mechanics are kind of weird, where you should think about Doom in a different way. This isn't always a bad thing. Like, use this to your advantage as a
Yep.
designer, but you know, count up all the things that you're doing, and is too much, too much.
Yeah, like, don't do all of these things.
Right?
Do, like, 2 of these things, yeah.
So this last point here kind of goes along with larger maps sometimes, but not always. Anything that's a persistent treachery or enemy, so ones that just make the board state more complex just by virtue of there are more cards on the table. Sometimes that means you can't see other cards because you're covering things up with the extra cards that are in play. I know some people like to put a treachery like underneath a location because if it's attached, like an obscuring fog. And I get that because of the space on your table, but also sometimes you forget that card's there because you can't see it anymore.
Yeah.
But a big map kind of can lead this to be a problem. Sometimes you forget about hunter enemies because they're over there and I didn't see them. Circle and done with a lot of the treacheries in people's threat areas or next to the agenda. Uh,
Really
it,
add up, yeah.
yeah, it adds up. So,
Yeah, it's also one of those things where, like, if you ever have seen a video of us playing Undimensioned and Unseen on in paper in this channel, what that evolves into, where uh, an example of the complexity of those Brood of Yog Sothoth, you'll notice that I don't even actually put the monsters on the board anymore. They're dice. I
oh,
use dice for everything because if things get attachments, it's a lot easier. Like, it's such a weird thing, but like it's the downside of doing this with paper, where if you attach a card to a thing that moves, the player is now picking up 2 cards as
yeah.
opposed to 1 card. And that sounds so benign, right? Like that, oh, they're just picking up 2 cards. But it actually is a thing that matters and impacts the table and how things move in the table space, and also by nature the complexity. So now if that guy has 3 things attached to it, the player's picking up 4 cards, or like 2 things, it's 3 cards, right? Like, and these things adds up, and suddenly now there's another enemy that has 2 things attached, and
Mhm.
all that thing is just adding to kind of like the, when I say like mechanical complexity, I don't mean the mechanics, I mean like the mechanical human fingers picking up these things,
Your
right?
fat fingers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have Obsidian Canyons as the background here. I'm not going to talk about this scenario any more than I am right now because I've talked about it enough recently. But it's it's probably one of the most complex scenarios out there because of the movement of cards. The
Yep.
cards enter play and leave play all the time, and you have to keep track of what happens at the end of the round. And we are talking about cards moving. Well, all the treacheries and enemies and clues and anything else that's attached also moves with there, and that's every round. Every single
Yeah.
round, something's moving around, and man, there's a large map there. So,
Yeah. I would say that Obsidian Canyons is probably the most complex Arkham scenario, um, because it has additional rules. It has a long setup. It has unusual mechanics and timing points, or extraneous timing points.
yeah,
It has cards that you don't even use, like that are just kind of there as placeholders. And not only that, I mean, it has persistent treacheries and enemies. Like, things are going to be following you around. There's treacheries that move between locations and like stay there,
yep,
right?
yep,
And then, not like, in addition to all of that, there's also map changes, right? Like, that's like
yeah.
all of those things that just add to the complexity of a scenario. Obsidian Canyons has all that. However, with all that said, I love the puzzle that Obsidian Canyons represents, right? And it's like an example of, yes, it is the most complex scenario, but I think it's a very fun scenario to play.
So, to use a phrase that I know you like a lot, we're listing all of these things. The question as a player, as a designer, that you have to have is it worth the squeeze? Does it actually add to the scenario? and make it into a good experience. I agree. I think Obsidian Canyons is a fun scenario. It's just there's so much. And then if you go east and it's your scenario number two, it's
It's
that's
insane.
tough, right? That's really tough for new players to figure through when they're still and I guess I'll get into this to the next slide here, but like still figuring out the game itself.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's just a lot going on. And is that really what the game is like in general?
Yeah, and I think that's, like, with the whole, like, juice worth the squeeze, this kinda comes to it where, like, I think if I could give criticism to the official designers for, like, the scenario like Obsidian Canyons, is I would've, like, play tested it and then been like, "Hey, is it required for there to be 2 map switches? Is there a way for this to happen organically with the map setup?" Right?
Hmm.
And a lot of the time, design is actually just trying to solve a puzzle, right? Like that's kind of like the thing that comes with it. How can I make these mechanics come across in the most elegant way? And I think that Obsidian Canyons is not really elegant. I enjoy playing it, but I would not call it elegant. And I think that that's kind of like the difference that we're going to be talking about with some of these other scenarios later today. They're all elegant, whether they be complex or simple.
Indeed. Okay, so let's just kind of give the other perspective here. That simple Arkham is still really good. Like we love this game. The bones of this game, really, really excellent, right? And as we said earlier, it's actually fairly complex at space. So it's okay to have a pretty simple scenario because players, new players, infrequent players are still getting used to the basic keywords and mechanics. Like they pick up a card and say, I don't know what alert means. Why are there three other keywords on this card too? Um, so anything that you add on top of it is maybe good, maybe makes for a fun experience, but also I'm just going to put this here too. There's still a lot of design space with a fairly simple scenario. Not like the most simple scenario. Not every scenario needs to be the gathering, but how much more actually on top of the base bones of the game do you need to change? Because sometimes adding a little bit is more than adding a lot more.
I think a good perspective that I have for a simple scenario is that worst case scenario, a simple scenario is boring,
Yeah,
but worst case scenario, a complex scenario is tedious. And it's one of those things where, as a whole, because Arkham, it's like there's two halves to it, right? There is the scenario that you're playing, but then there's also the expression that you as a player in the deck that you play.
that's right.
So even if a scenario is boring, you're able to express yourself through the deck that you are playing. But that expression becomes a lot harder to do when most of your brain space is trying to manage the tedium of the scenario. So it's like that's why simple is still good and why you as a designer should hit for simple, because even if it's less exciting than you want to have the metric be, your players are there able to experience their excitement. It's a big reason why I say like boring scenarios are some of my favorite to play when I'm trying out a challenge run deck idea, because it often means that I'm able to fully play with my deck and really like make it like go all the way,
Mhm.
which is a good thing to give your players the space to do that.
Yes, and I'm glad you brought this up. I wanted to talk about the player deck as well. And I think conversely, sometimes a super complex scenario doesn't allow you to play your deck because there's some, you know, strange restriction on,
Yeah.
Doom, or maybe there's some weird restriction on being able to use firearms. I don't know. So the simple ones, I agree completely. If it's boring, at least you shouldn't be playing a boring deck and you're having fun on that side. It's allowing
Yeah.
you to just go around, get clues, kill enemies. That's still good. I think that still can be good Arkham.
Yeah.
Cool. And then of course complexity is necessary. There's so many scenarios in the game and they have to stand out in some way. They have to do it. They can't just all be. Although I do kind of maintain in that if Midnight Masks were just the game,
Yeah. It'd be infinitely replayable.
right, it would be a good game. Like they could have just package the game with one scenario and uh yeah, it'd be like playing a board game. A lot of board games are just the same every time, and you have one
Yep.
scenario and it's fun to play through. That said, I do think you can't just make 50 of those, so they have to stand out in some way.
Yeah, it's one of those things where there are something that we talk about a lot on playing board games, and perhaps you have talked about it as well. But like the player archetypes, the Spike, the Johnny, and the Timmy,
Mhm,
are kind of like how the players define how you can define like a player's play style. And I do legitimately think that that carries over into scenario design as well, right?
mhm.
Where it's like there are players who like those chunky scenarios where they have to crunch a million numbers. I'm a maniac who likes the minecart in Hemlock because I like the puzzle aspect of it.
Yep.
I like being able to pace out how we're going to go across the minecart, right? But I also understand that players don't like that. So like the complexity I think for that is actually kind of a good thing to explore again because there are going to be players who vibe with that kind of thing.
It's also optional, right? So you don't have to play the ones that don't resonate with you,
Yep. Yep.
which is cool. You're right though. That there should be a variety. Variety is the spice of life, and in Arkham, I think that's true too. They want to challenge you in different ways, and sometimes a simple scenario is a palate cleanser from a complex one that you just played before, or maybe through the I would say through the ebbs and flows of a campaign, they want to change the pacing a bit. So I think you do need to have this to some extent. And of course, the kinds of stories I might want to tell
Mhm.
are only possible if you add some mechanics. And I like I think the campaign-wide mechanics feel a little bit less like a complexity addition compared to base Arkham when it's something you get over and over again. Like you're learning about Haunted in Circle Undone. You get it
Yeah.
early. Actually, you don't even get it the first scenario. You get it in the second scenario. Oh, you get it in the prologue. So okay, but it's a rule that you need to remember, but it's also one that you won't forget easily, and you keep needing to know about it the rest of the campaign. That kind of stuff is okay until the mechanic itself becomes maybe a bit unwieldy, maybe something like the concealed cards, where you don't know what the rules are all half the
Yeah.
time. But I like the idea that they wanted to do something for Scarlet Keys that reflected the story of your part of the agency or the foundation. You're looking for, people in the shadows. Like that kind of idea is cool. Did it work out? In my opinion, eh. Uh,
No, I feel like concealed should have been like Scarlet Keys was so complex that that's like a mechanic that like maybe the best course of action was to see if they could get it down to one line of text in some way, right?
right.
Because it's an example of yeah, it tells a great story, but you can't like another thing about like for these kind of things is and that concealed doesn't do is that you as a designer should see you can iterate on your mechanics, right? So you can add complexity as it goes. It's why the scan mechanic in dark matter is so good is because axolotl literally changed it up over and over again through the campaign until its climax, right?
Hmm.
um and if your mechanic is too complex, it can't really add for that additional layer to it, right? Like you can't iterate on the mechanic to make it more exciting in a way, right? If it's already max complexity, you can't make it smoother.
It's funny because the most complex they go with that is in the finale where the concealed cards do something different, really. And it's still just kind of a nightmare.
Yes, yes.
Anyway,
Yeah. But yeah, no, like they tell the story, these mechanics, and that like that's why the complexity is interesting because it adds the extra layers of things, right? Like an example of this is all of those acts and agendas in Threads of Fate,
mhm,
right? Like that's a very overwhelming board state, but it is actually very it was a great success in its design because all it did in the first ones was just like have clues here, right? and then you can kind of see it evolve over time. There's going to be more story cards, but the act and agendas are going to stay the same. And it's a very well liked scenario because the complexity tells a story.
And it makes sense because you know what acts are. Adding extra ones doesn't really change that, right?
Yeah,
Progressing through the story. It's just that now there's more, literally more stories to be told at the same time, which is, I think, a success in that iteration of what does an act do.
yeah.
Okay, last little point here, little meta joke here. Sometimes I think it's very flavorful when the game kind of drives you crazy as a player, not the investigator.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all had our crash outs playing this game, but sometimes I feel like it's on purpose. The designers are like, have fun doing this. I don't think that's good design, but sometimes it feels kind of flavorful.
Yes, yeah, yeah. It's a little bit. I mean, an example of this that was actually a meta decision was the campaign guide for Phantom of Truth in
Mm.
Path to Carcosa, right? Where they sometimes will try to uh, be a little bit cheeky, right? And that sometimes like they can kind of just like hand wave to be like, no, this is supposed to be a complex game that kind of has that kind of like overwhelming feel to it. We could just put that into the mechanics as well.
Anytime you flip an act or agenda, you're not supposed to do it. I love it,
Yes. Yeah. No.
right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, yeah. I think that there is some fun stuff that they do there.
But you're so used to flipping them, right? Why wouldn't you do it at the end of a
You
scenario?
gotta flip them. You gotta see what's on the other side. It's a rule.
All right. So, wow, that took longer than I thought because I guess we had some really cool stuff to talk about. Honestly, that was a great
Yeah.
discussion. So how do you get the balance right? And this is again just in our opinion. We're gonna take a look at 8 scenarios that use varying amounts of complexity in positive and negative ways, and just give you a little brief kind of take on why something was successful or less successful in our views. So we've got 8 scenarios. So both of us picked a positive, simple scenario, complex scenario, and then a negative, complex, and simple scenario to discuss. So wait 1 sec. We're going to hop over to TTS because, boy, it would be a pain to actually set up all of these scenarios in any other way. So hang on 1 sec. All right, so we're going to start with a banger. This is a great scenario. Justin, you picked this as an example of a pretty simple scenario, but has a lot of great stuff to it. It works out very well in its favor.
Yeah. So this is the Palin Mask from Carcosa. This is the hardest part of the scenario design wise is probably the complexity is the catacombs deck where you just have to like make sure you have the right split of
Hmm.
where the Tomb of Shadows is in comparison to everything else, which is probably the hardest part of like the setup thing. But this is our starting map here, right? We have uh catacombs, the gate to hell, most likely, and then there's a location above and below. This one might change, but this is the starting thing here.
Hmm.
And then the only additional mechanic that you have is as additional cost for you to enter, you have to spend player clues. And when you put locations in from the deck here, rather than having like a set rule you need to follow, the card actually says what it does, right? So, like when you enter this location, it says the forced effect when narrow shaft is revealed, put the topmost catacombs in the catacombs deck into play above or to the right. That means when you enter a location, the location that you entered tells you what the next step is that you need to do. You don't need to look anywhere else. An example of this is like still a way that I think is really good in like Pit of Despair,
Hmm.
where it like follows the same rules for how new locations are put into play. But I think that the Catacombs one is actually even more simple. And because of that, this is something that you might not realize as a designer or a player, but because this forced effect is here, that means that the top ability actually needs to be pretty simple as well,
Hmm.
right? So the locations themselves aren't actually that's not a location. No, aren't that complicated, right? You just have like 2 lines, maybe 3 lines of additional text that add extra flavor and complexity to the locations without adding too much to it. Um, Likewise, as I mentioned in the video, this will eventually be a big map, but they were able to manage that with the adjacency rules. So, like, all the locations are connected to each location adjacent to it. So that means, again, the map is big, but they're able to make it a little bit easier because the locations are connected to each other. Just as a flat rule, you don't need to worry about location icons. And it means
Mhm.
that when the map evolves, you get a different experience each time. This also actually does something from the Midnight Masks as well, where there is an enemy on the back of the first agenda, which means that it's able to add a cool twist to the scenario, some complexity, without requiring any additional cards to be set aside at the start of it, which is
Hmm.
actually a very good way of, again, lowering the complexity, but adding to the flavor and like feel of the scenario and giving some dynamics to it. For the cards that add to board states, we have the pit below as an example. There's a few of these that get added to locations. Um, and this one is a very easy thing to understand, which is just like get out. Where you are, get out. It's a very quick thing for you as a player to know. I could just need to get out of here.
The name, the
I think,
art, it all tells the
yeah,
story, right?
yeah, it's just like get the hell out. And then like the other thing that is like the corpse dweller is potentially a complicated enemy, but because everything else is so simple and it's just also really bare bones, it makes it this guy is actually pretty easy to also just like quickly understand. Notwithstanding the whole pallid mask thing, but we're not here. The pallid man, but we're not talking about that.
Right. And this scenario is, I mean, highly rated because
Yep.
it's so different every time, and yet it is as simple as you say. Like the mechanics of just going around spending clues, which is kind of just base Arkham, results
Mhm.
in something very interesting and challenging, which is a map that you can't plan for. And
Yep.
treacheries that make you move around, enemies that make you make some decisions about them, because this guy can often spawn at locations that you're not at. So now he's got this hunter issue where 2 damage and a horror coming from behind is really scary. So there's
Yeah, and then
also
it'll.
very
Yeah.
few acts and agendas, right?
Yep. Only two agendas, which is really good. So like it has a 18 doom threshold, so like a
Hmm.
lot of time, and like it's just like it's more about the complexity comes from the map being laid out, and it also does something that I think is kind of lost in more modern Arkham,
Hmm.
where um there is a completely different version of how this scenario can end, but the only way that it's told is through the act cards.
Hmm.
Like there's no like additional map switch. It just you will either have to get out through the blocked passage or you're going to have to run back to the start because the catacombs are collapsing, but neither require additional setup at the start for it. They're
Hmm.
both played within the confines of the scenario design itself.
Wow, that was very succinct and just on the money. I totally agree, and that's some really good insight, Justin. Anything else to add?
And
Should
I'm
we move
excited.
on to the next one?
No, I'm good to move on. I'm excited to hear your positive complex.
Great. All right, so here's mine. This is the simple scenario that I think is really, really cool. It's to the Forbidden Peaks. It's the second scenario, technically, or fourth of the Edge of the Earth campaign, which is a campaign known for big maps and a lot of locations. How many locations do we have here? I count 6.
I
There's
also count six.
it's that's it. There's never any more. There's a couple that are
Yep.
set aside because they're randomly removed, and it's just one direction. These are all connected in the way that you expect if you're ascending a mountain. So there's not a whole lot of decisions about which way to go. It's either up or down, and you want to go up. That said, there is a little bit more to it. These locations are randomized, and what it says you do when you go there, sometimes when they're revealed, is kind of like what we're talking about with Pallid Mask, where it's just when you go
Mhm.
there, which is when you're picking up your mini card and moving it, that you need to worry about the thing. And they are kind of nasty, but the other thing is that you lose all your clues when you move up. All of these are victory point locations. It's just a little bit of a race between do you drop clues on treacheries like Snowfall, which is in here somewhere, uh, and being able to move up because the other side of these locations are you can't enter unless all of the clues have been discovered. And I would say, just like Pallid Mask, there's just two agendas, and the flip will spawn the Terror in the Stars enemy. There's a
Yeah.
little bit of a metagame, and if you have played this before, about who picks up what and where are they when this happens. But that said, it's still kind of cool. Uh, there's one act. It's just this: go to the
Yep.
top and resign.
Yep. Doesn't have additional, like, complexity, different things to keep track of. Like, there are, yeah, the things that you carry up the mountain,
Hmm.
um, but even then, that doesn't add, like, too much complexity, and it's also, like, that is something that you yourself as a player has brought into the scenario, so to speak,
Hmm.
so you kinda feel inclined to interact with it as opposed to being forced to interact with it. Um, I only have, like, one thing to add about this one for you as a custom content creator, if you are designing your own scenarios. Look at what these locations, what they all have connected to them, right? Which is after you move to it from a location below it. All
Hmm.
of them have that because that's kind of the identity of this scenario, right? It's about climbing up the mountain.
That's right.
When you have uniformity in a mechanic, it allows you to explore that mechanic from a multitude of different ways. It lets you like change how you're looking at it. And then that provides one, it gives replayability because the mechanic is so simple and you as a player and designer are trying to just interface with that mechanic as much as possible, and how the idea of simply exploring one mechanic can lead to a lot of different options within that mechanic itself.
So the encounter deck plays with this too. Since this is not the first scenario you've played, there's a few of these cards that you've seen before, but they work a little differently when you can't really move away as easily. So something like Antarctic Wind, which in the first couple scenarios, you're like, well, I'm just going to leave. I'll go around in a circle and come back. So there is some complexity in these cards. I'm also going to pull out Whiteout as another one of these, where I said don't have too many things that attach, but they do go away at the end of the round. They all go away at the
Yep,
same time, which is nice.
yep,
But in this scenario, especially, they play a little differently than you did before, and it's not, I don't think, as oppressive as you going away from a location across the map and then you realize that 2 rounds ago you were supposed to discard this thing. The small map makes this much easier to deal with.
yep, yep.
Cool. Yeah, I like this one a lot. This is just it's also a bit of a breath of fresh air from the rest of the campaign that has large maps. So it's funny that
Yes.
they were able to, at the same time as designing those scenarios, which I like too, make something that is actually way simpler and just knock it out of the park.
It is widely regarded as the best in Edge of the Earth, and I think it's a good example of why simple doesn't necessarily mean bad.
Hmm. And yeah, like there's a lot of meat on the bone here, I think. Ultimately,
Yep,
because they use just a few additional mechanics, and yeah, as you said, that they lean into them. They all have the same forced effect. Man, this is again, I didn't expect this inviting you on for this video. I should have, but just sort of your attention to that kind of detail is very impressive to me. I know part of it's because you've done a lot of custom content playing and some designing, that this is kind of top of your mind when you see the official stuff do it right.
yeah.
Cool. All right. All right. Now we're moving on to a simple scenario that is probably less successful. Justin, you picked Where Doom Awaits.
Yeah, so this is the penultimate scenario in Dunwich Legacy, and this is probably my least favorite scenario in all of Arkham. And the reason for that is it's boring. As I talked about earlier, how like a worst case scenario, uh a scenario can be boring if it's too simple. And ultimately, I mean, I fall into the side where I would rather have a little bit more tedium than I would boredom, but that's just me as a player. I'm not speaking for every player out there.
Hmm.
But Where Doom Awaits is just so simple, but it actually doesn't really follow the trends that I was talking about in some of the earlier ones. So we have the big thing for the scenarios, there's these diverging and altered paths. And I think that in new Arkham, these would have had some consistency to them. So let's just flip these over and kind of see what they are. So this one is after you reveal, discard the top two cards for each action you have remaining. And then this one has, after you reveal it, lose the remainder of your actions and immediately end your turn. Okay, so these ones were the same, right? But like the whole thing, and I think this is kind of where we see on like the Dunnage thing. Yeah, so take two horror if you have no actions remaining, right?
Yep.
And this is kind of like there's nothing wrong with this in theory, right? But what ultimately it ends up happening is you as a player is you're kind of forced into a gameplay loop where the idea is I'm going to move in as my second action because then I get like the least negative impact
Mhm.
and I also potentially have like I can actually do something with it depending on this, right? Like I kind of want to be in this game state where I have to follow this one path. But if you compare this to the other two previous simple that we talked about, it is um that is such a big difference for how you interface it with it as a player, right? Where it's like you have control of when you move in. You get to ask interesting questions of like,
Mhm.
do I eat this treachery attached to my location? As opposed to this one always being like, you have to move in with your second action, right? Like you just kind of like have to. Moving in with your first action, worst case, you just lost two actions. That's really bad. Moving in with your last action, worst case, you take two horror. So you just always have to move in with your second action, and there's like not really any sort of like challenge with it. And because it is like random for how they are,
Mhm.
there's like no sort of like mechanical identity unifying them, right?
The other part I
Um,
think is that since after you reveal, the other player can just go in scot free. Where to the
yeah,
Forbidden Peaks, it's anyone moving. So I don't know. Like these just kind of feel like a you flip the card over and it's like got him. You know, you don't. I feel like the designers were on their kind of mean streak here, rather than making something that's interesting for the players to engage with.
yeah, and it's also one of those things that because they are so random for how they are, let's like
Mhm.
even like look at this last one here. Place player doom on it, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, this one's this one's just like mean all the way down. There's not even clues put on it for you to be able to do things with them. But a big thing for this is that what was I gonna say? I just lost it because this destroyed path kind of got me. But like it, so if this was like Arkham, I think if it was designed today, I think this scenario would be very different. I think that a big thing would be that they would all these locations would actually be from a shared pool
Mhm.
and they would care if like you came from the base of the hill or ascending path. I think that that would be a more interesting way to unify them. And then like it's like we haven't seen oh the frozen spring is worse if you enter from ascending path compared to base of the hill,
That'd
right?
be
Like
interesting.
that is like
Yeah.
some kind of like more freedom in the decision that comes with it without adding that extra complexity.
I
Because
want to
the
play
only
that scenario
complexity,
now. That sounds
yeah,
cool.
no. The problem with these ones is that like they don't actually add anything in comparison to the other ones that like we talked about, Forbidden Peaks and the Catacombs, right? Because the Catacombs are growing the map, but this one is just very um it's always the same, right? It's very rigid in its delivery. Um, and same with Forbidden Peaks, even though that one is very rigid in its delivery, the locations of the entering the location is always the same for every player. So like every player is being tested in the same way,
Mhm.
which admittedly is actually probably one of the biggest faults of Dunwich Legacy is they haven't really figured out the best way to hit every player unilaterally across the board, as we saw with like Miskatonic Museum, where like the
Yeah,
fighters don't get to do anything. And I think that carries into where Doom awaits here.
agreed. I think the other thing just to throw in here is because this scenario is so simple and the encounter deck is so large that there
Yep.
doesn't feel like, as you said, a unifying theme or message from this particular scenario. Just that they threw all the cards that they had already and a few new ones into a big stack. And whenever you play this, you get some number of these 44 cards,
Yep.
and it just kind of falls flat on its face that way, especially for scenario 7, where it can
Yes.
be very, very easy and you just get through, and then you're like, I guess that was a scenario, or, you get comboed out, which doesn't happen that often, but it can feel a little like you're,
It can be very swingy.
yeah.
And the last thing I want to talk about here is the text on the agenda.
Hmm.
Flavor,
Yep.
12 Doom.
Yep.
Then we go to the next one, 10 Doom. Like, cool storytelling thing here with like the weird text script to this, right?
Yeah.
But this is 22 Doom. And the only way we hit that like 18 that it matches the Pallid Mask is if you had 4 of the Brute Escape. So this is probably going to really be a 20 Doom scenario where all you're doing is entering locations,
Yep.
right? And it's it's just not enough. It's just this is a simple one that is ultimately brought down by its simplicity.
Hmm. And that's the challenge, right? Like you want a scenario to be simple to make you be able to use your decks and play, kind of at the pace you want and have a fun time. But there needs to be something going on in that scenario for it to stand out and make you have some kind of memorable, I don't know, experience with it. And this one just doesn't have it.
Yep.
Okay, enough about this one. I'm gonna go right on to the one I want to talk about, which is I think kind of complex, although simple in some other ways, and it comes right after this one. So I think it's reasonable to talk about it. So goodbye, Where Doom Awaits. Instead, we will look at Lost in Time and Space. So this one I've chosen as complex, but does so in a way that I think is super interesting. Now, what's complex about this scenario? Because when you look at it and set it up, I mean, I even look at the guide here at the very end. The setup here is absolutely insane. It is just this: gather all these cards from the encounter sets listed, put another dimension into play. That's the location there. And then there's one, two, three cards out of play. You're done.
Yes.
That's insane for this game. And yet, the locations in the encounter deck, that's kind of the new thing here. Uh, that makes it kind of complex in the gameplay. So the map ends up growing. There's a few other things too, the encounter cards I want to talk about. But once the locations come out, and this is based on revelation effects that all have something usually bad happen to you when you draw them, we start building out a map, and they can come out in random orders. And what you're trying to find eventually, once you get enough clues, is the edge of the universe, I believe. That's the first one. Yeah. All right. So the complexity for this one, as you can see already with just a few locations, is the spaghetti that appears on TTS and in your when you're playing in paper. I don't know what you do. I mean, I've attempted to try to arrange the cards together on certain parts of the table, but it is a mess to try to look at. That said, it's basically just about this. You have locations that come into play. You have to make your bridge between wherever you are and this last location. It's this one. It's the same icon for the Tear Through Time as well. Yeah, this is the first one. So you do have to pay attention to a lot of things that otherwise don't appear. So one, of course encounter cards, or sorry, the locations in the encounter deck. This one has Surge. This one you have to decide about whether or not to keep it or place a Doom on it. This one you have to pay attention to if you get the last clue. This one, after you leave, place a Doom or you get rid of it. So a lot of them have to do with popping in and out of play, which I think is at least unifying enough for you to pay attention to. And I'm
Yep.
missing a couple locations still.
You made
If you
the
want,
elder sign, by the way.
what's that?
You made the elder sign with
I
the great
did.
lines, just so you know. Yeah.
Perfect. I'm gonna mess that up. Okay.
No.
Dimensional doorway. Okay, this would again has some kind of negative revelation, and then something if you end your turn there. Um, it if you can spend the resources or it goes away. And then I'm missing the green one.
Yeah, I think so. Oh no, green's prismatic cascade. You got that.
Okay, I'm missing. I think it's the steps then. Nope, I have the steps. Well, maybe I'm not missing anything, but regardless, this because there's multiple of each of these, the board can get kind of crazy looking. But I love it. I think this actually works incredibly well because the encounter cards and the locations are all conspiring against you to break this bridge between the starting location and where you're going to. So the complexity isn't like off the charts compared to say Obsidian Canyons or probably one that you're going to talk about later too. But for this point in the game's lifespan, I think it was probably mind-blowing to play for the first time. I know it was when I played it first. It's like, what is going on here? How do we make this work? How do we pay attention to all this stuff? But in this case, because there's a lot of simplicity in the setup as well as the one unifying thing it's trying to do, even though paying attention to all these different locations and the different modifiers that scale with number of locations and everything else, it's worth the squeeze. I think this like works particularly well.
I think this is a great example of a complex scenario that grows in complexity the further you are along with it. Because you're right, the additional setup, like the initial setup, is incredibly simple, right? It's just probably the most simple scenario setup in all of Arkham forever.
Hmm.
And it's crazy that the scenario actually can be pretty complex in the decisions that you have to make with it. I think this one's the mechanical complexity is lower than the actual player complexity, that like you as a player, the decisions you need to make, which I think is a big win from a design perspective.
Hmm.
Um, Another thing is that I want to talk about two things.
Ooh, I should have
One
mentioned the
is the
one-way
yeah,
connections also, but yeah, go ahead.
yes, no, that adds to it. Yeah, you can't go back, and it's like all this kind of stuff that comes with it.
Hmm.
But the revelation effect. I think it was genius design to have it have a negative effect so they were able to be encounter cards. Because I think if
That's
this
right.
was approached today, these would just have surge, which I think actually would create more issues. Like, yeah, because this one doesn't have a negative effect, right?
Hmm.
I
But
think if this was designed today, all of them would just have a surge and a pause and like just put it into play, right?
mhm.
I think another scenario that recently came out that actually shares a lot of similarities to this, but kind of showed a lack of the same sort of elegance was the apiary,
Apiary.
because
Hmm.
that has the same sort of mechanic where you're trying to find locations in the encounter deck, but you can actually see the big difference where the difference between this one and that one is the destination starts out of play. So you don't need to add all that extra complexity in being like, but what if we lost it, right? Because the answer to that in this scenario is um this action, right? So if you lose your path through, you're able to just find it with one of the most simple actions that you can do to get it done. And I think that that's a very elegant solution to the what if we miss it, as well as like additional copies that I think like the recent version of the apiary was kind of lacking.
Do you think for the apiary that I don't think it's a huge deal, but that one it always shuffles in the locations you're trying to find into the bottom like 10 I think or something like that, which is just an additional mechanical. Okay, I need to do that, like split the deck in some way and then shuffle and then pay attention to where you're going through the deck. Like, does that add interest because of that, or do you think it's not necessary?
I think it's ultimately it's the simple thing of just like, would you rather move into a location or spend two resources to move into a location? Like it adds like that extra little bit of complexity that makes it like, is it ultimately necessary? Like it might make it the design of the scenario flow better, but is it ultimately required? Or can like or like I give you examples like the Hemlock House and the
Hmm.
clues on locations without investigators. Is it ultimately necessary, or is it okay if some players are just able to have a lucky run through it?
Yeah, that happens here, right? You could get very lucky. I've done it where you just draw the locations in the right order and you just march on through and great, you did it. Um, it's probably okay because most of the time that doesn't happen. So let the let the RNG sort of let you have an easy run sometimes.
Yeah.
All right. That's about all I wanted to say about this one. I do like the encounter deck. It makes a lot of sense. There's like enemies that make things go out of play or forces you to try to go backwards to them. And then Yogg-Sothoth can show up too. But ultimately, I think the design is simple but creates a complex board state that I love.
Yep, 100%.
So now we moved on to your complex scenario, which is good. Admittedly, this one is far more complex than most scenarios, but I think there's a lot to talk about. It's the longest night.
Yeah, so The Longest Night, I personally view it as one of the best scenarios they've ever designed, and this comes from the experience of playing a lot of custom campaigns where I never have really enjoyed the tower defense siege missions. They were always missing a little bit of something, and I think this is to me is a testament to uh one thing I often say is that like the official Arkham stuff just feels official and the custom stuff always feels a little bit custom, even on the hits
Mm,
and the misses for both sides. And it's one of those things where this scenario I was like, "Oh, this is what the tower defense is." And it's because the reason it was successful is because an extreme layer of complexity that
mm,
is something that often feels unfair in the fact that there are two encounter decks. So it's adding an additional step um, where after Doom is placed, every investigator draws the top card of the enemy deck. So that means that there is an additional deck of enemies that are there to make your life miserable. However, the encounter deck has no enemies in it, which means that the only threats that you're facing, you're guaranteed a player threat a turn. The only thing is, though, those are the only enemies you're going to have to deal with, barring basic and signature weaknesses, but that's
mhm,
not part of this conversation.
mhm,
And this is such a level of complexity that was lacking in all of these other tower defense missions, where this one is hard, but it is actually incredibly balanced due to this one simple mechanic here, which is just that you're getting an enemy every turn. How do we as designers guarantee that for the players,
mm,
right? So this is like the first piece of complexity that comes with it because the map is big, but the map also actually is relatively simple, right? There is the center point and then the offshoots in all the directions that go with it, right? And then the enemies are going to start appearing at various locations. We start with the big bear in play, and then like all of these guys are going to start coming down paths to attack the center location, and that's the location you have to defend. So
mhm.
the map itself, while big, is actually relatively simple, um, but it adds extra layers of complexity even more with these barriers, decoys, and traps, which are this is actually something we didn't really talk about too much, but I find that this complexity doesn't matter, which is a weird thing to say. But when the complexity is in the hands of the players,
Mhm.
they feel less obligated to interact with it in a negative way. They're not
True.
forced to interact with it. They're able to use it to their advantage. So, in that nature, it becomes a lot easier to be like, oh, I want to put this barrier down. I'm doing it. The game isn't doing it. So it's
Mhm.
like, I'm controlling this. I want to interact with it. It's a positive thing. Positive complexity for the players is easier to swallow than negative complexity.
So let me just say that I do find this to be quite complex because there's three different tokens to use, but I decided that it wasn't bad once I realized that this was the scenario. This plus the
Yep.
fire probably. That once this is what you interact with most of the game, it's not that hard to remember these sorts of things and what they do and how you should use them. Like this is the game. The part
Yep.
that I think
Yep.
is difficult instead is the enemies, and this guy, of course, is the one that ignores all of these things, all have slightly different things that they care about. I don't know if you want
Yep.
to talk about the enemies now or wait on that for a
Well,
second.
that's actually something that I've my biggest criticism of this scenario is that every enemy should have had an icon on like maybe like the right side coming down here
Yep.
of what they got triggered by, like what they triggered.
Yes, that was the first thing my playgroup said after we played it the first time. That's a better idea. We came up with like they should have colors to
Yeah.
like indicate what things they don't like the art or something like the frame. But you're right, icons on them probably should have been because again, on TTS, like, I can hover and press Alt, and this is okay. In
Yeah, but in paper,
person,
you have to pick it up and,
you
like,
pick
look
it
at
up and
it.
you're like, "What's over
Yeah.
there?"
Yeah, because like, imagine, like, this equine hybrid. Let's just grab 3 of them. I need to shuffle this deck.
Yeah, it's
Like, let's just grab these guys, right? So, like, this guy, he would have a resource and a damage icon up here. Then he goes into a location, there's a resource or a damage, he gets stopped by that thing. Like, that thing triggers against him.
mhm,
This guy only has a resource and a horror token on it, right? Then oh, this guy doesn't care about damage. This motherfucker down here, he doesn't have anything, right? So, like, just screw this guy, you know?
right.
But, like, I think that this would be, this is an example of, because I do think that, yeah, this is probably the negative complex side of this scenario, managing all of these, um, the text on all the enemies. And I
Mhm.
wish that there was some UI stuff that made it a bit easier.
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, like, they have the files, they could add to it, right? And I've seen play custom content creators do stuff like this with their stuff to kind of differentiate them. And I think that the visual framing is very important to do that. With that said, I do think that they're starting to embrace it, and I think a sign of that is the fact that they've actually updated the frames
Mm,
to better get information across.
they're bigger too.
And they're bigger as well. Yeah, I think that those are all changes that hopefully it means that they'll be able to, do that kind of stuff in the future. Um, but there, yeah, like, I think you're 100% right. And this is something that you as a player, when you're playing a scenario, and you as a designer should ask, which are, what are clue tokens for?
Mhm.
Because that is actually a good way for you to know what you need to be doing and what your players feel like they should be doing, right? And it's right. This is the scenario because that's what you spend clues on, right? Um, and that is a good way for you as a designer to get across what players should be doing.
It's also quite fun once you figure out, I think, this whole thing. I think the first time some people play and they don't quite have it for this one, I mean, you can resign, like, they give you an out here, sort of. But I've had so much more fun with this on repeat plays because I was able to focus a bit more on what the scenario was trying to tell me to do.
Yep.
But it's difficult. It's still a big challenge. But I love the two encounter decks. That's actually a really very smart thing to say, that the fact that the ways to ensure that there are enemies every turn is to have an enemy deck. Like, it sounds so simple, but you're right. That's the missing piece here.
It really changes so much. Like, I'm not even like, I'm not even being like, not even downplaying it. It is the thing that every custom one I played with this kind of thing, because there's a lot of them, because it's a cool mechanic thing we never saw in official Arkham.
Hmm.
um, was just that the fact that this actually provides an oppressive feeling, but it's balanced. It's always the same. You're always getting these enemies, but when they're in the deck, it can just change, and they're always going to the same locations. They're always going outside,
That's right.
right? Um,
Which makes
and
you be
my
able to
Yeah,
predict the ending, right? Like, you can get to the last
yep,
couple of rounds and say, okay, we need to manage this, this, and this during this investigator
yep,
phase, which is a lot of discussion, but I think is quite um it's worth it. I think it's rewarding to have those discussions with your table and say, all right, this aloof guy is going to move twice because of some annoying location here. Does anyone have something that can block an aloof enemy in some way, or grab the aloof
yep.
enemy and kill him before he moves in? Um, yeah,
It's nice to have because it's a much better alternative than, I'm gonna just book v shroud this location 3 times, right? Like,
exactly.
it's nice to have. That's why, like, it's good to have some PB with your J, right? Like, if that's what it's all about.
Hmm.
And my final advice for players playing this game, for enemy phase, just go north, east, south, west. Just do it like that.
Hmm.
Don't do it by individual enemies. Just go by path, and it's going to add so much less stress to you as a player to figure out that phase.
That's true. So the kind of the ding I had earlier is, like, there's something different, but as far as the enemy spawning, but that's easy to remember.
Yep.
It's always just you draw another card, or everyone does. And the movement, once you figure out patrol and why it doesn't work like hunters do, it's predictable. They just go to the farmhouse. It makes sense. And the enemy phase itself works as normal. So yeah, the only part I think is tough is the encounter cards, I think, that make them move or attack out of phase, which is just, I mean, it's a challenge for the scenario.
Yep. Yep.
Where does it say that they? Yeah, here it is. During the enemy phase, each ready unengaged enemy attacks as though were engaged. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where, like, if we look at like the starting scenario, like the start of the scenario, we're looking at a situation that's like this, right? So we have our barriers and decoys. We're taught that during setup because you get to place them, so you're
Hmm.
immediately forced to interact with the mechanic.
That's right.
And then you have, sorry, not the Slytherin hybrid. You have the bear and the captives. So there's a the setup, like the setup flop is complex, but the scenario grows in complexity as it goes when you start to like have like you get to place all your things and then the first enemy shows up and you're like, "Oh, this guy ignores these." That probably means the other enemies will too. I
Hmm.
just wish they put that across better for players to easily understand at a glance.
Yeah, and it's a hard scenario. It really is, and but it does feel rewarding to get through.
Mhm.
And I think that's where the negative complex ones that we're going to talk about in a second. Did I already do mine?
Yeah,
No.
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, anyway, you're going to see the next scenario where we're going to talk about the kind of flip side for these situations. Okay, so my scenario that I think is complex in ways that are actually very annoying is Dealings in the Dark. This is Scarlet Keys, this is Constantinople, and I'm just going to lead off with this statement. When my group played this for the first time, blind play, it was abysmal. And when that happens, usually there's something to it. I do change my mind on some scenarios sometimes, but I've returned to the scenario. In fact, we just started over. It was just so bad, and it just didn't get any better. That's the unfortunate part. It's too long, and there's really no reason for the additional complexity. I hate to say it. Okay. What does the scenario have you do at the beginning? It's pretty simple that you just have four locations and you have some mini cards that go out because you're going to start with some cultists one at a time. And this is buried at the part at the end here. In player order, each investigator discards cards on top of the encounter deck until they discard a cultist enemy. Each investigator draws the enemy they discarded, resolving its concealed keyword as granted by Agenda 1A, and then you shuffle everything back in. So it's not as simple as just you draw some cultists and they go into the shadows. Let's say we're playing two players and we have these two guys. We have to do all the mini card business, but there's also so they have concealed one. There's this business about evading them that we don't need to talk about. Where is it? So we need to get four per player clues. Ah, it's on this one. We have another card. After one or more doom is placed on a cultist enemy, flip them to their clue side. If an enemy has more than three clues on it, move them here in excess of three, and then this is the number of clues that they have. So you're kind of, it's kind of like Echoes of the Past where you're trying to rush getting clues, but they actually acquire the clues too instead of it just being doom. Problem is, it's hard to get rid of these guys because they are in the shadows, and you have to pay attention to this whole thing. If you can't find this guy, because at the end of the enemy phase, he'll collect a clue. He just picks up clues forever. And I'm just sitting around trying to get my own clues and, uh, maybe find these guys too. There's text on these locations. Like, this is a way to get the clues back, but it's tough. This one makes you give up your clues, which is the opposite of what you want to do here. And then this one lets you expose a concealed mini card. So there are some ways to deal with this, but it's still a very quick race. That in itself is okay, right? Everything we said is complex, but it's okay. But that's not the end of the scenario. Once you have advanced the act here, you are told whether or not you reach the clue threshold first. Doesn't actually matter. I mean, it matters, but it doesn't matter that much. You proceed to Act 2 set up in the campaign guide. Okay, You set all of the current locations aside without discarding any cards or tokens there. I have to pick up all this stuff, keep everything on them, and put them away.
Mhm.
Then I do something totally different. It tells us they will come back into play later. Anyway, you shuffle these 7 Grand Bazaar locations, and then you pull a token from the chaos bag to figure out which of these 5 random setups you get. Okay, and then you put these things into play, and you do the whole same thing again. Let's just do it as if it were, I, I think this way. One more, the East Gate. So now we need to get 8 per, keeping the 4 per that we had potentially before. We don't spend any clues when we advance. And these locations will also get all of our concealed mini cards and the rest of it. There's a lot of stuff to pay attention to on these locations. Like this one, if an enemy moves here via hunter or patrol, it happens again. It's the rooftop access. Makes sense that you can go quickly, they can go quickly, but still, you have to pay attention to this. Make these things harder, take control of a clue, don't use weapons. There's just a hodgepodge of effects. And all the while, you're trying to get clues and find the cultist again. Is that the end of the scenario? No.
No,
Again,
it's not.
if the cult reached the clue threshold first, you give the twisted antiprism key to them, or you do, or you get it. Of course, you have to go to the East Gate, by the way. Um, and then all of these locations from the first part come back, and who knows where they go
And there,
here.
yeah, they're attached to the current map as well.
Right. So now you need to run all the way back, and then you get a last location. It's the docks. Um, and that's not it either. You have to flip this thing over to the unsealing, and there's like 5 other things to pay attention to. So now the Doom doesn't work like it did before, although they collect them at the same rate. Now it makes them move and attack without exhausting, and the key can go back and forth. I don't know. That it's enough, right? This is I've said my piece with this.
I think you have. I I remember when we did the blind play of this one, the fact that we had to like set the starting map aside. I mean, I'm not a big fan of map switches in scenarios. I
Yeah,
think it's inelegant. Um, so one thing that we've been talking about with this one is that because each of these are different, you don't know what to expect in comparison to, for example, Forbidden Peaks or even like the Catacombs, right? Like those are
hmm
kind of things that they all function differently. But just let's just say, for example, imagine if this scenario was just in the bazaar, avoiding the cultists who were coming out of the shadows and stabbing you, getting clues to try to bit their plan, and then eventually you just had to escape to the docks.
hmm
They added one location in play. How much better would this scenario have been? Because it's the question of, was all that other complexity around it worth it? The answer is no. The answer is just like it's not. And I think that it's the idea of, again, less is more. Where like, did we need to be going around the starting areas and doing all of these? Is the idea of in the Grand Bazaar actually a cool enough like idea for a scenario? Yeah.
probably.
Like it
Yeah,
kind of just is, right? Because then you could also like pare down the mechanics, right? Um, and like maybe this idea of them trying to escape is just, are you trying to get out alive as they're like coming in to like actually finish the job, right? Where it's all these other things where this is kind of more for like the custom designers. If you are looking at all of these different pieces of one story and you're adding complexity on complexity on complexity, ask yourself, what if I just looked at one chunk of that complexity and expanded it to make it better? And I think that that's where this scenario failed. I mean, you actually made me say Jesus Christ during it when I forgot about this, and you flip this card over and there is, they get prey. Like this is so much text. This is so much text. In addition to this side, which already had a lot of text on it,
yep.
right? And this is not even balancing the locations that you have to pay attention to, and also all the enemies that you need to pay attention to and the treacheries that are going to come as well. Like there's just so much that you as a player need to balance in this scenario because it was just complexity on complexity on complexity on complexity.
Yeah, I didn't even pull out any of the encounter cards other than the enemies because they matter. Oh, I guess I should have. I should have done that. Look, at the other side of this flips back and forth, and now you need to add eclipses to this and do things extra times, um, and draw more cultists. Like this isn't in itself terrible, but it's
Yeah.
just another thing to keep track of and to add. Yeah, what if they made this two scenarios, right? If they really want to keep the storyline of dealing with the twisted antiprism, it just feels like. I mean, I agree with you. Probably just cut out one part entirely, and you're okay. But if you have map switches, too many of them, where there's just different things going on, or you wanted to have two legs of this race, maybe just don't. Remember that
Yeah.
half of the gameplay is the player playing their own deck and trying to remember how to deal with concealed cards. That you don't need to add as much complexity to this end because they're probably already struggling. I remember being so mad playing this and realizing I forgot the enemy moves a second time through this location.
Yeah.
It's just
Because
like,
why would you? How would you remember that? How would you remember that?
yeah,
Right. However, you did make me realize that I would have loved a Scarlet Keys with less map locations, but each location had two scenarios. You actually kind of felt like a story at each scenario,
yeah,
like each location.
like
That'd be kind of
fortune or
cool.
folly, right?
Yep.
Okay. It's just too much. And if you've looked at any gameplay that I've had with this or other people, like it's noticeably longer, not because the Doom is necessarily longer, although it could be. It's just that it takes more time to think through this scenario
Yeah.
and it's just not worth it.
Yeah, this is actually something when I was designing one of my own board games. I realized the game is a lot more fun when the longest time you play the game is during the player's turn as opposed to everything around the player's turn.
Hmm. Okay. I'm done with this one. Okay, we're back with your complex scenario that doesn't quite hit the mark. It's horror and high gear. This is the fifth scenario of the Innsmouth conspiracy. I'll let you take it away.
I don't think anyone's ever had a good blind play of this scenario. I feel like everyone, yeah, I feel
uh,
like everyone has messed up some sort of rule in a way that the scenario did not play as intended. And I think that that is a consequence of design that is too complicated for its own good and ultimately is a miss on the complexity side of things. I think that we should applaud the designers attempting to try things that are unique. And I think that horror and high gear is all right when you know how it actually works,
yeah.
but it is so headache inducing the first time you play. Because you asked me if I wanted to go to a page, and I was like, I don't think so. But like, let's just remember how we looked at Lost in Time and Space a few minutes ago in this video. That's not this scenario. We have a whole page of rules. And I remember Travis with when it was still in the Mythos packs, and he was just like flipping over his little Mythos sheet. I think that this one was actually bigger than regular ones, if I remember correctly.
Hmm.
There was just like so many pieces that came with it. I could be wrong with that. It's been a long time, but I do remember Travis being like, why are there so many rules? Like, this one has one, two, three sections, and they take up the entire page pretty much. Which is, this is just like, before you even get to playing the scenario, you need to read about vehicles, which we did learn about in Devil Reef, right?
Yep.
But there's also running and stopped, and there's also the road X keyword, right? Where it's again like one of those things where, let's just say for example that you couldn't stop the car. Like, yeah, that's not realistic that you can't stop a car, but how much does it actually matter to the scenario to actually have this extra line of text and then have these cards be double sided, right?
Hmm.
Also, I wish the headlights were off in the stopped version. I think that that would have been a nice little touch to have, not the here, but just realizing this right now.
Headlights aren't even
um
on this one.
What the hell, Thomas? But like, so we look at all this stuff, right? So this is our flop. Not too bad, not too bad. But then we got to populate the road. So we got one card here, and then we got to look at our road card, and these generally work the same, right? These generally work the same.
Mhm.
But then we have the line of text up here. At the end of the round, starting with each rearmost location, yada, yada, yada. There's so much line of text here, in addition to all the lines of text that we just read on this part over here. This is to make it so that things move. And then there's also this additional cost for you to move while not in a vehicle. You must spend 2 actions. Again, let's just like paint a picture in our heads of what happened if we couldn't stop the car, right?
Mm.
Because I think that that would have been an okay thing to have happen, and it would reduce a bunch of stuff. Then we go to pedal to the metal. Each enemy gains hunter. Okay, I get it. So we don't get like a map that never ends, even though players have found a way to make a map that just keeps going forever. But then at the end of the investigation phase, each vehicle that is running must move to a connecting road location of the driver's choice. This goes back to something you said, which is the complexity of timing points, right?
Mhm.
Where this is at the end of each investigation phase, right? Like, it's one of those things where the timing of this matters because it allows you to kind of get away from hunter enemy,
Mhm.
right? But it's like one of those things where uh figuring out the order of this, because like this one's at the end of the round, this one's at the end of each investigation phase. There should have been like some sort of unification of these timing points to
Yeah.
make it like better, right? Where like this one could have been at the start of the enemy phase, this one could have been at the end of the enemy phase, right? Like it's like one of those things where just having like these timing points come with it that can make it all work. Generally, the locations aren't too bad. They function primarily the same, right? But then suddenly you get to a location that says Road 3.
Did you
And
set
you're
it up
like,
this way on purpose? Did you
no,
get
this
this?
just ran
Oh,
happened.
perfect.
Right. Yeah. You get here and you're like, wait a minute, Road 3? So you have to take two of the locations as well as just a set of locations that are just here. Sorry, it's like this actually. See, I almost screwed it up in my own explanation of things here. And then you have this.
So let me ask you,
Yeah.
why did you put the cards like this? What in the
Uh,
instructions showed you that that's how it's supposed to go?
do they actually say that anywhere? Or is this just like the way that like people just do it because it's the way that makes sense from it?
So it does say that you uh,
Yeah, put a new column.
a column. Okay,
Yeah.
but there's no picture here.
Yeah.
Why is there no picture of what this should look like?
Yes. Yeah. It would do a great job of kind of like explaining this whole thing. And now, like again, I don't think the locations are the problem for this one. The locations I think function very similarly with across the whole board here.
Hmm.
Um, but now we're getting taught about the long way around, which in and of itself is also kind of a complicated thing to deal with here. Because it I've seen players mess it up. I've seen our own table mess it up. Where how long exactly do you stay around here, right? Until the end of the next round.
So
So
2 rounds, kind of, kind of,
2 rounds, kind of, but it doesn't feel like intuitive that much, right? It's like
right?
adding that extra little piece um, to get there. And it's just like a perfect storm of all of these constantly moving pieces that you have to deal with.
So where do you
And I
think
think that,
the designers think you should put this? Is it here? Is it here? Is it up
yeah,
here? Like this, the
I
columns. I
mean,
understand
honestly, yeah, it could be up here. We
it
could do
could,
whatever we want.
right? But if you have multiple uh vehicles, like I just don't. I think the
Yeah,
columns
someone
thing
could
is
else could
not
go here,
right.
right? And then it goes like this. Does it even go like that, or is there only one road is only in front of it?
I think you can only have
There are no
one.
locations
Right.
ahead. There are no locations ahead.
Right. That see, this is sort of the
Yeah,
problem is that's not intuitive until you go back to the book. I mean, it seems
yeah.
weird, but mm, I just don't
And
find this
it's one of those
elegant.
things where I think that this is a great comparison to Dealings in the Dark, because mechanically Dealings in the Dark is actually like you're mostly just getting clues. But like there's so many things to remember around it during your turn. right?
Mhm.
And I think a horror in high gear is kind of the opposite, where you're only getting clues, but there's so many things to keep track of outside of your turn in regards to movement and all that, that it just makes a very complex scenario that is ultimately more tedious than it is fun.
Yeah. It should be very simple in terms of like there's not very many locations, you're just getting clues. The loop and I know like after playing this a few times, the loop is pretty obvious. You need to get all the clues and you never interact with the road mechanic other than to spend the clues. But in that case, I think there's kind of a design flaw that this stuff is just not necessary then. They
Yeah.
could have come up with a
I-
different way that doesn't involve I get it. They're trying to do some kind of a chase, go the wrong direction,
Yeah.
whatever. But
Well, I mean, honestly, just do a long way around, drop road one, and
mhm.
after a vehicle enters it, place one doom on the current agenda and move it back to the previous location.
Sure, right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good point. Can you go backwards?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't see why you can't, right?
It says it's a connecting road location of the driver's choice. You can go backwards. That's a bad idea, but what if that just was the only way you dealt with this, right?
Yeah.
Make this a treachery or something on this side that says go back.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. I think that that's like one of those things where I mean, honestly, and I've played this game tons of times, and it wasn't until Volkloss pointed out that in two player you could just get two cars and then stop the car on the back location, get in the other car, and then drive. Which seems like so it's like one of those things when there's so many different moving pieces in terms of how does this scenario work.
Mhm.
It adds those weird edge cases that players can exploit in ways that I think ultimately break the spirit of the scenario.
Well, I think that's a consequence of the designers having too many things for them to keep track of, right?
Yeah.
That's not necessary for them either. So things can slip through the cracks. Yeah, yeah. In the setup, it just says you choose a vehicle. It's like, well, why would you ever take two cars in two player? Well,
Yep.
they didn't think of that. It doesn't, you wouldn't do that. But
Yep. Yep.
there's just too many other things for them to have probably changed during playtesting that they never circled back around to that one.
Yep.
Whew. All right, done with this one.
Done with this one.
Great. All right, we're back for the last one, and this one is Beyond the Gates of Sleep. This is my nomination for a simple scenario that is just simple and nothing more. It's not a great version of the simple scenarios that we've seen before. Now, I should preface by saying it is an intro scenario. It is one that is the first scenario of the campaign, so you might say, fine, don't make it too complex, don't make it too I don't know. But the reality is, I think of all of the intro scenarios in the game, this one is probably the most simple and the least to kind of enjoy from it after replays. Whereas I think there are some quite complex and interesting scenarios that are intros in the other campaigns. So I don't think it's necessarily um, you should expect the first scenario to be a certain way. All right. This one is notable for not having a encounter deck at the beginning. In fact, it's just not even here. You do have a million Doom on the agenda, but when Doom is placed on this agenda during the Mythos phase, if you're at one of these initial locations, you put some more Doom. So you're encouraged to get going down the steps. In fact, there's 4 acts here, and they really just tell you kind of stepwise, haha, to move on to the next location, which is pretty simple. It's kind of hand holding because it's just telling you now go to the next location, now do the next thing, which is you get these two old men to talk to. And in fact, the next act is just talk to them.
Yep.
Great. And then once you do that, we start getting a few more locations into play. I'll put them here. I think the enchanted path comes in as well at this point. Yeah. And I'll talk about this real quickly. It's just a simple test here. You do this once, doesn't even matter per player count. but it's more difficult. Talk to him, read what it says in the back. Cool.
Yep.
Talk to him. Same deal. You could also kill him. That does the same thing. And then you walk down the steps. You just get some clues or you get rid of your cards in hand. Yeah, you can't go here unless you get all the steps. This is, as you've often said, for Dream Eaters, on rails.
Mhm.
And then finally, you get all those clues and you get to the enchanted path. And we get to our one situation where we get to remove all the other cards and get an encounter deck, as well as um, 6 of these enchanted woods. And that's kind of interesting because
Yes.
we don't know what they are. So it's the part that's actually not on rails as much. But, and this is now getting to the last act here, you just have to get 5 per clues. Now, there's something else here too, because there's no clues on this location. It says that it gets +1 shroud for each unrevealed enchanted woods location in play. So, how do I get all those clues then? There's no clues here. And it also says after the first time any investigator enters an enchanted woods location, record that the dreamer is strayed from the path. They told us earlier, if we talked to these guys, that we were not to stray from the path. Don't do that.
Don't do that.
You could spend 3 actions. You do as you're told, but you feel as though you're missing something. Place a clue here. And then you take some really dumb investigations for the rest of the game, the rest of your 19 Doom agenda here. Ultimately, you decide not to do that probably, and these locations are here that are somewhat reminiscent of the ones we saw earlier today from Doom, Where Doom Awaits. In fact, these are almost identical to what we just saw.
Yeah,
Um, a
it
couple
is
of
kind of
them,
sus.
yeah, a couple of them are a little different. This is the introduction to the swarming keyword as well. This one gets
Yeah.
you an enemy, so they're not great to enter generally, um, but there's other variety here. You just go around and get some clues, spend them all, deal with the enemies that show up, maybe a Gug. That's it. That's the scenario. The encounter deck, honestly, other than the Zoogs, is completely forgettable. Like I can't even think of how this encounter deck manipulates anything going on here. I think it doesn't. It's
Yeah,
based.
just Lost in the Woods is the only one that actually cares.
That's right. This is the one where anyone who's at an Enchanted Woods location takes a test, lose an action, take a horror. I mean, there's just some bog standard stuff that you just take damage or horror from failing other kinds of tests, but it doesn't interact with. I'm even getting clues. Like you have obscuring fog, but that's about it. And it just makes for kind of a dull scenario. It's too simple, especially since they didn't even have an encounter deck at the beginning. You just are on rails. You get here, you get some clues. If you want to get all the clues, you can spend a bit extra time to get your victory points, and then you're done. It doesn't even have the sort of enjoyable part of the rest of the campaign. I was thinking about talking about Point of No Return, which is probably worse in terms of being on rails, because that one has some cool story to follow, which is all right. Um, but it also has a lot of XP that you've gotten at that point, so you're playing with the cards you've upgraded into your deck. Here, you just have the level 0 stuff, so it's not even uh, that interesting. It doesn't have that benefit of the rest of Dream Eater's inflated XP.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, it's just dull, right? It's just kind of dull. It's that thing I talked about in Where Doom Awaits, where it's kind of just boring, right?
Hmm.
Um, it has the thing on the like kind of like yeah, like the on the rails where you're just kind of like going through like going down the steps and you're just like, okay, I've done that part and it's always plays the same,
Yep.
which is I mean, I think it's fine for the blind play, right? But when you look at like the minutia of the design, I actually enjoy seeing the similarities to Where Doom Awaits. It's kind of like, ooh, maybe there's something here where like random locations that punish you when you enter them isn't the best way of doing this kind of thing.
Hmm.
And there's also like no variety where you're going to always see 6 out of the same 7 locations, right? When you play the scenario. Like maybe if there were 10, now we're cooking, right?
Hmm.
Cuz there's like some variety that comes with it. Um And then I think that I just like want to talk about the do not stray from the path. Normally, you're conditioned to play Arkham to not record things in your campaign log, but this never comes up again um, in any way. And I think that like this is obviously a reference to the literature that this comes from. But I think that as a whole, the designers like I think they did a good job to try to tell players not to leave. But I know good Arkham players who took it as they told us not to leave. We're not going to leave,
Yeah.
right? Um and I think that they could have done better to go with that. I think the idea of rewarding players for not straying from the path is not the way because you're supposed to stray from the path.
Hmm.
But I think they could have signposted it better to do that sort of thing.
So my take on this, I mentioned this to you earlier today also, was that I think players, veterans especially, who have gotten to this point in the scenario say, man, this scenario is very simple. And they're looking for it to be more complex. They're kind of assuming
Yep.
they told us this. There's probably something cool mechanically or otherwise to, to do this. Like maybe on the agenda or the act flip, all the locations become revealed or something. I don't know. Um, like this a forced effect expires in some way. And the reality is, nope, there's nothing there.
Yeah. Yeah. Nope. There's just don't you don't want to stay here. You gotta just go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even the encounter card, the Lost in the Woods or whatever it is, kind of tells you maybe don't go anywhere. But actually, that doesn't work, right? It just doesn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, ultimately, I should also sort of mention about the story. Like Dream Eaters is a great blind play because the story is so dense.
Yep.
The story cards by flipping the veiled locations, I think, are cool. Um, And I always get some people in the comments who are like, "Well, I play so much Arkham, I don't care about the story anymore." And to some extent, yes, that's true because the part
But
that changes is the rest of it. But I also don't think that that means that I don't care about the story when I talk about the mechanics and such first. I don't think the story is that brilliant that I need to have it overshadow the rest of the actual gameplay, right? Um, that that's just sort of me. Like I think some of the campaigns have good stories, some of them don't, and that's okay to admit that sometimes the story is actually bad also.
and at the same time, you do care about the story, commenter, because the scenarios themselves mechanically tell a story.
Exactly.
So
Yes.
it does matter. The story is there all the way down to why you're getting the clues and how you're using those clues. It's all telling a story.
Right. So I don't think it's necessary to have the amount of on rails that this scenario or some of the other ones do in order for you to tell a story. So
Yep.
I think they could have done this differently. Maybe they wanted to lean in more to the literature, and that's fine. It's good for some people if that's the way that they're enjoying the story, but that is ultimately, again, not something that I care about as much. But I did enjoy this on first play. I thought it was kind of cool, but just afterwards, and you
Yeah.
kind of
I
step
don't
back and say, there's not much there.
I don't hate playing it, but I don't like playing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Contrast that with Waking Nightmare, which is the other intro,
It's
which
so
is,
good.
it's so good.
It's more complex, but it is very good.
And it tells an incredible story.
Yes, it does. Yep.
So, okay. My goodness. I thought this might have been an hour video or hour and 20. It's not. Oops. But that's okay. I've had a great time talking about all this with you, Justin. In
Likewise.
fact, I was surprised myself at how much we had to discuss and how many little intricacies about these scenarios maybe didn't pop out to me first. But I know you've got a ton of experience with this game, including all the custom content. So I really want to thank you for all of those comments. Do you have any like last thoughts about maybe advice or just
Uh,
like what works and what doesn't for you?
So I just think with the thing that elegance should be your goal at all times when you're designing a scenario. I mean, and you're not always going to hit it, but you should always try to strive for it. You should always look at something and be like, can I do this with less? And that
Hmm.
works for like any sort of creative endeavor. Just like less is more is that for a reason. So, and I think that even in complexity, you can do elegant things with a lot, but like I think the true balance of a very elegant, complex scenario is taking less is more within the confines of all your complexity as well.
I think of Arkham sometimes like a soup or a stew, and just playing Arkham, there's already a lot in there.
Yeah.
So what you add for the scenario, it should be significant. It should be like, I don't know about the main ingredient, but it's something like that. But you don't need to add too many main ingredients. You can add one main ingredient and have a lot going around that.
Mhm.
Like I think this scenario is missing a main ingredient,
Yep.
or maybe the main ingredient is like some old chicken you found in the back of the fridge.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah. There's something that that really stuck with me is so one of my favorite bands. They they described their keyboardist as the spice to their goulash, and it like adds that extra flavor to everything, and that really sticks with me, right? Which is like find your spice, find your keyboardist, the thing that fills out the spaces between everything else, right? That's kind of the goal to make it like the simple stuff shine.
the other thing I want to highlight when I was putting together this list and thinking about the scenarios is there's actually quite a few scenarios that are they look kind of complex in my mind in terms of how they play out. Like there's a lot of things you have to think about, but ultimately because they're centered around one thing, one
Yep.
main ingredient, that actually they're simpler than
Yep.
they look on first blush. So when you see that there's, a lot of encounter cards, but they're all trying to do the same kind of thing, it's really that there's just one thing. And I
Yes.
like that
Yeah.
sort of design tightness with a lot of the good scenarios where you're getting pressure in maybe one of two ways. Even though a lot of stuff seems like, man, I have to focus on all these enemies and all of these um, locations, but really they're trying to push you in just one direction.
Yep.
That's elegant to me.
100%. Yes. Yeah.
All right, that's it for a long and amazingly fun, I think, discussion with you, Justin. We'll, I'm sure, talk some other time about something else here on my channel, but uh, this is great. I'm very pleased with our discussion here. So, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.